Hello and welcome to another exciting tutorial. My name is Sanjay and today I'll show you how to paint my favorite type of Space Marines, the secret 666 chapter, the Grey Knights. The first thing you will need to do will be to prime your miniature with lead belcher. When we want to paint a miniature mostly covered in metallic colors, I recommend to use a metallic primer. An undercoat of metallic flakes will save us from needing too many layers of paint. I will apply Grey Knight steel all over the model. This particular color has a bit of a blue pigment on it. That is what makes this paint unique. I think most of the tutorials you can find make the armor of the Grey Knights to look way too blue, resulting in a super colorful miniature and not too much in line with the grim darkness of the far future. I want to use a mix of null oil and Drakenhof nightshade for my model. Most of the tutorials you will find will use only the blue wash for them, but it seems too colorful for my taste. Instead, mixing these two washes together makes it a little bit more mute. I don't really know if there is a darker blue wash out there, but in the meantime I will use this mix. I will apply this all over the miniature, but making an emphasis on the recesses of the model. An important thing to remember is that it doesn't matter how thin you apply this paint, it always changes the overall hue of the surface you applied it to. So I don't recommend you to only apply it in the darker points. I recommend it to you to apply it everywhere and let the gravity do its job. Once this face is dry, you will see how the miniature changes in hue. It will turn really blue, and I want to fix that later. And how do you fix that? You guessed it, going back to Grey Knight steel. I will dry brush it all over and let the wash to remain only in the deepest recesses. You can immediately tell how it's starting to be a little bit more of the silver original color we had, and the blue only remains in the dark points of the miniature. Do this step as much as you like it. Covered as much as you prefer. At the end of the day, how dark or how bright you want your model is up to you. In my case, I wanted to go to the middle, because I am planning to do some really bright highlights. Now the thing I highly recommend is adding Vallejo metal color to your collection of paints. I am using aluminum mixed with Grey Knight steel to create some large highlights on the more exposed areas. This step is more important than it looks. The armor of the Grey Knights is monotonous, so it really needs some contrast to really shine. If instead what you wanted was a quick way to paint the bulk of your army, you can instead use a gentle dry brush of this mix and jump to the edge highlight step. I am using this step to start building reflections on older surfaces of the armor. I don't know about you, but I'm having a great time painting this dude. Next, I will use aluminum for the edge highlights. This particular paint are super smooth and super metallic. It is honestly really hard to catch it on camera due to the great specularity that they bring. Apply this in all the edges that you want them to go super shiny. This is going to make the miniature really pop. Also, it's really important to mention at this step, do not use the super fancy expensive Kolinsky brushes that you own, because this is going to damage them really badly. I recommend you to go and use some synthetic brush you have out there, especially like in my case, a very thin one. I really need a really thin brush because this paint runs really strongly, it's almost like a wash. So you have to be very careful that it doesn't spread in the areas you don't want it to go. To create even more realistic reflections, another thing that I will do is to use this to cover a small portion of the areas that I painted before with the granite steel mix. This is going to help a lot to understand the overall shape of the model. At this point, basically you can tell how the camera gave up, and it's not going to show you all the true colors that I'm painting, it's just simply showing white. This is to show you how shiny this paint is. I really cannot stress enough how much I recommend you to get it. I'm going to start applying all of these in all the points that I want the strongest contrast and the strongest light reflections on them. It's mostly edge highlights, but I wanted to apply it both in the armor of the Space Marine and also on the gun, as you're going to see later. A problem that I find very commonly in the granite models, or in the custodes, or also in Stormcast Eternal models is that once they are on the table, all their shiny parts are everywhere and you can't really tell their shape. To change this, I add more of this paint in a thin line that follows the pose of the model, or some other surfaces. The goal is to enhance the shape of the model, so that the details don't steal the attention from it. The last thing I'm going to do is to apply this paint in the eyes. Why? I'll show you later. Every now and then I take a break from painting, take some distance and look at the model, and then decide if it has enough or it needs more highlights. In this case, I took like 8 breaks already and I keep adding more and more highlights. When you're painting models that have one prominent color, it's kind of tiring, and you probably are going to get dismotivated. You always reach a point in which it looks worse than before it looking better, but once you skip that phase, you're going to really start liking your results. To get a better view on the shine of the armor, I will go to paint all the black parts now. This is a pretty straightforward step, basically go and apply black paint. This paint only goes on the joints of the armor, and this is going to look great after you added all your edge highlights, because it's going to be the super intense white color metallic and then to this super dark black paint you're going to be using. No, it's not a problem of the video and it's not a problem of my camera. I am shaking that much because I am really tense of ruining my work. It happens to everybody, especially when you're on camera. Now for the highlights of the black. Normally I recommend to highlight the black with a more saturated color, like some kind of blue or some kind of green. But in this case, to give some contrast to the blue armor that we have, I want to use just neutral gray. So the first highlights will be done with a dark gray color, in this case it's Asian gray. There are not that many highlights to apply, basically it's the highlights on the gun and then on this exhaust in the back. I don't recommend you to apply a lot of highlights on these joints of the armor, just a little bit so that they are a little bit visible, because they are still have to be some kind of hidden part of the armor, so don't give it too much time. For the more intense edge highlights on the black, I'm going to simply add white to my mix of dark gray, and this is going to be applied only in the most visible highlights of the black. These are smaller and thinner. Be careful not to have too much paint on your brush.
Yeah. Sometimes I get so mad, there's no controlling me. My thoughts get so bad, I'm like, I might grab a bat, I don't know. My wrath, my blood boils over like, oh God, here goes. I lost all feeling from my head to my toes. You said some shit that I can't let go.
Now for the red pieces, I am going to use the new Vallejo game color Nocturnal Red. The red pieces on the knight must be really visible, but not to overpower the overall body of the knight. Apply this paint thinly and careful. Do not have too much paint on your brush to avoid accidents. A key element on painting this miniature will be not to have too many colors. So I'm going to use the same red that I'm using for the book as for the purity seals. As you can see, I'm using both my hands and basically all my fingers to give steadiness to my brush. I really don't want to make mistakes in such tiny details.
Come at me and you won't get any older, dude. Crack your holder too. Heating up inside of me, blood so violently. Thanks for trying me. Now it's finally time to see how this rivalry becomes a dynasty.
If you use your paint thin enough, you're going to avoid a lot of accidents. But you're going to require a couple layers of this. Once you're happy with that, we can move on to the next step. Now for the Patchment pieces and for the book, I'm going to use Ushabti Bone. 2 layers of this paint is going to cover what will be the base of this color. Thankfully, all the metallic paints that we had to use before is going to help us have a really bright color in this case. Instead, if you had had some kind of black undercoat or a black primer, you're going to require a few more layers of light colors to cover them. I just want to mention that although I'm listing all the paints that I am using for the sake of the tutorial and be able to show you how to get exactly these results, I do think there's a lot of paints that you can exchange depending on whatever brand you're using. Some kind of bone color or creamy yellow tones are gonna help you to do these patchments really well. Now to add contrast to these pieces, I will paint the midtones with elfic flesh. Try to paint only the parts more exposed to the light, and leave unpainted the more hidden zones. Basically my goal is to not use any wash for this part, because I want the patchments to remain light colored. I'm applying it on the edges and on the more visible zones, but this step is very similar to a dry brushing, except it's with a really thin brush. And now for the edge highlights of this, I will use ivory. Notice that I am not using white for this. This helps to create an atmosphere on the model. The next thing I will do is forget to paint the highlights on the actual purity seals. Don't be like me and try to stick with an order. I will have to come back to this later on. Next thing is the gold pieces. For some reasons, a lot of tutorials for the Grey Knights go for Retributor armor and end up with a super yellow gold as well as a super blue steel. Instead, I took inspiration from the Games Workshop art of the Grey Knights, from old codices and Games Workshop artwork, and noticed their gold is not nearly as yellow as they tend to be painted. I even noticed that the Joy Toy models for the Grey Knights don't use a saturated gold. So following this, I will be using Runelord Brass. This is a much more sober tone, and it still looks kind of like a gold. Once again, I reiterate that it is because of our primer that I am able to paint only one layer of this paint and be enough. Without that, we would have needed a couple of layers to add enough metallic flake for the reflection. But thanks for the lead belcher, we don't have to. Do not forget to apply this paint in all the tiny nerve-wracking elements of the miniature. We'll darken this color with the one and only Agrax Earthshade, because it simply can't do no wrong. Notice that I am still using a very tiny brush and I am applying the paint only in the recesses. Basically, the Agrax is going to flow wherever it wants to, however I want to restrict it to only some areas. Still, my brush is full of this paint. This is simply to let the paint flow much faster.
All the demons quiet, yeah, we were built to thrive, yeah. I think that we've all had enough, yeah, I think that we've all had enough. Sick of dealing with the old plan, they know that we're calling it wrong. You got me like, oh yeah, I think that we've all had enough. Sick of dealing with the old plan, they know that we're calling it wrong. Hey, it's too late to try to go contain it, a generation fueled by creation.
As always, remember to let this paint dry very well before continuing to the next step. If you don't do this, basically you might risk to mix the wash with the new color, and that's really ugly. Now to highlight these parts, I will mix Runelord Brass with aluminum. Now, this is going to help you because once you have the same kind of light, it allows you to show that the miniature is in some kind of atmosphere. So the highlights of the blue are aluminum. The same highlights of the gold are also going to be aluminum. This is going to really look great, because with a cohesive ambience light, the miniature looks a lot more realistic. Remember that all these gold pieces, like all these inscriptions, are supposed to be sacred and holy, so they have to be shiny. That is why even in the lower parts I will be applying this color in all the edge highlights.
taking shots at the enemy. I'm gonna make it to the top, leave a legacy. If I got something to say, you better let me speak. Turn it up a new degree, bitch, you ain't seen anything. I pop off with the new rock, electronic, blow the sonic roof up. I'm too honest when I take a few shots. They're too toxic, need to take the noose off. And you cannot save me, 'cause I don't need saving.
Now for the most interesting part. The blue blades of the grenades are unique, so I will start painting with a bit of white on the zones that I am planning to glow the most. This helps me now to decide the other sections of the blade. The next part of the tutorial is going to look a little bit like painting non-metallic metal, but with very saturated colors. The darkest point of the blade I'm going to be using a dark, deep purple. It's not like these blades are supposed to be blue, they are supposed to be blades infused with the force of the wielder. That is why we're going to start creating a gradient from a purple to a blue. Adding the purple element to the gradient is going to make us feel like this is energized and not just simply blue. I'm going to mix in my palette the purple and the blue and start blending both colors together. Next I will be applying the blue in all the zones that are not as dark as the purple. Next, I will be applying a light blue color in the next parts of the blade. First, I want to mark where I want this color to be, and later I will be blending the colors together. What I'm going to be doing to blend the colors together is simply grab the colors in my palette, mix them together to try to create an intermediate tone and apply that. I'm going to be doing this over and over again and create a lot of intermediate tones. The more of these intermediate tones we have, the smoother the gradient is going to look. Fill your brush strokes very softly. Let the paint mix with the previous color. And here is where it all gets interesting. I will be constantly mixing paints on my palette. I will be using 4 colors in total: the dark purple, an intense blue, a light blue and white. We need to be careful not to take too much paint to keep the layers as thin as possible, because we are applying paint many times, so we cannot allow us to have a very thick layer of paint. This blade is a good example on how to approach non-metallic metal, because it has a very straight line and a very defined curve. Normally, in these curves is where you want the brightest points of this kind of blades. So I will be applying the brightest points in the curve close to the tip of the blade and then over the line of the edge of the blade. Finally, for the most intense part of the glow, you want to use white, but keep it only in very small areas and one thin line over the edge of the blade. Once I got the full contrast of the blade, I was really not satisfied on how it looks like, so I'm going to add a little bit more color. I will be applying the colors as before, the bright blue, the intense blue and the dark blue mix as well, but I want them to be smooth. So all I want is this blade to be a little bit more impressive. Perhaps it needs a little bit more gradients. Depending on what you're actually painting and depending on the size of the blades that you're using, you may want to add more than one brightest point. Like in this case I just added 2. But it's possible that you have a very long sword or you're painting the enormous Dread Knight, so you maybe want to have more of these gradients and exchanges of colors and contrast. So be wild, it doesn't really matter how much you add, because you could have a ton of these gradients and they're gonna look amazing. And if you add only one of these gradients, it's not going to really look like it's some kind of metal. So perhaps 2 or 3 even in a small blade is going to be enough and is going to look impressive. Once again, the contrast is so intense that the camera can't really catch all the colors. So I'm going to stop this for now. I'm going to move on to the next step. To showcase all these glowing parts, I'm going to paint the spine of the blade in black. This is going to give you a nice and clean contrast and you're going to be able to admire the blades in detail. Off camera I painted the other blade and the other side of the first blade. I wanted only to show you the process of painting them, while I know it takes a lot of time to get it done. So at home, be patient, it's gonna take you some time to learn how to do it and then to learn how to master it. But once you like what you see, you're ready to continue. You don't really need to invest that much of yourself in it. Don't let it become a stressful part, enjoy every part. Now for the glowing eyes of the granites, we're going to try to replicate the same glow we use for the blades. So whatever colors you're using, try to use a very similar ones to the eyes. I'm going to start by applying a white undercoat on the silver part that I had painted previously. That silver is going to help us a lot to make these eyes look like they're glowing, because they're reflecting the light from the metallic into the white paint, causing it to get much more intense. The next thing I'm going to do is to mix the bright blue we used to white. This is going to be applied on the recesses of the eye and then on the areas around it. And finally, a very thin layer of the intense blue that I'm using around the eye. This is basically to simulate the light of the eye touching the helmet around it. Now, an extra tip that really is dependent on your own style is to paint the base of the model. Now, what I mean by this is that the Grey Knight's armor and the Grey Knight's style in general is supposed to be very neutral. So the blue silver of the armor has to be a little bit contrasting to the base. So in this case, I recommend to paint in a saturated color. I am using brown. So I'm basically simply painting one layer of brown, covering it with edge highlights in just a way of a dry brush, and then it's simply going to give the miniature a little bit more of realism and make it contrast from the floor it's standing. And there you go, this is how I like to paint my Grey Knights, and I really hope you like them too. Remember to click on the like and subscribe and all that stuff. My name is Sanji and I'll see you next time.